The storm had been raging for hours. Thunder cracked across the sky, shaking the earth like the roar of an angry beast. Rain pelted the ground in heavy sheets, soaking the broken landscape of a small, secluded valley at the edge of human civilization. Rain Beckett pulled his jacket tighter around himself, adjusting the pack on his back as he trudged up the hillside. He had lived alone in these remote parts for years, far from the crowded cities. Solitude suited him. He enjoyed the simplicity of life, building with his hands, shaping the land, relying only on himself. But tonight, something was different. Through the pouring rain, he spotted a figure huddled beneath a rocky overhang. At first, he thought it was an animal, a large one, judging by the silhouette, but as he got closer, he realized it was something far more unusual. A woman. Not a human woman, though. She had smooth, pale lavender skin, almost glowing under the flashes of lightning. Her hair was thick, silken, and white, cascading over her shoulders like liquid moonlight. Her eyes, large and filled with a strange sorrow, flickered between deep violet and blue as she gazed at him. Her clothing was torn, barely clinging to her slender frame, and she shivered, hugging herself against the cold. She looked exhausted, desperate. Rain stopped a few feet away, raising his hands in a non-threatening gesture. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. She didn't respond. Instead, she lowered her head, pressing herself against the rock, as if trying to disappear. Rain exhaled through his nose. He didn't know much about aliens, only that some had started appearing on Earth after their homeworld was destroyed. Most of them had been taken in by the government or rich corporations. This one, however, was alone, and she had nowhere to go. "I've got a cabin not far from here," Rain offered, shifting his pack. "It's warm. Got food. You don't have to stay out in this mess." The woman flinched but lifted her gaze slightly. He could see hesitation in her expression, distrust, uncertainty, but also something else. Hope. After a long pause, she nodded once. "All right," Rain murmured. "Let's get you out of here." He took off his jacket and carefully draped it over her shoulders. She tensed but didn't resist. Without another word, he led her through the storm back toward his home. She didn't know it yet, but she had just stepped into a new life. Rain's cabin was small but sturdy, built by his own hands using the stone and wood from the land around him. The fire inside cast a warm glow, flickering against the rough walls as he pushed the door open and stepped aside to let the alien woman enter first. She hesitated on the threshold, her violet-blue eyes darting around the space as if expecting a trap. When nothing happened, she stepped inside, her movements slow and careful. The moment she crossed the doorway, the warmth of the fire seemed to wash over her, and she let out a quiet breath. Rain shut the door against the storm and set his pack down. "You're safe here," he said, his voice steady. "Nobody's gonna bother you." She didn't respond, but he wasn't expecting her to. Instead, he walked over to a shelf and grabbed a thick blanket, holding it out. She eyed it warily at first, then took it with both hands, wrapping it around herself. Up close, he could see the subtle shimmer of her skin, as if tiny specks of light danced beneath the surface. "You hungry?" he asked. This time, she reacted. Her lips parted slightly, and she gave the smallest nod. Rain moved to the small kitchen area, pulling out a loaf of bread and some dried meat. He didn't know what her kind ate, but she had to be starving. He set the food on the table, along with a metal cup of water, then stepped back. She hesitated again, but after a moment she approached and carefully picked up a piece of bread. She sniffed it, then took a small bite. Whatever it tasted like to her, she didn't complain. She ate slowly at first, then faster, as if afraid the food would disappear. Rain leaned against the counter, watching her. He wasn't used to having company, especially not an alien woman with glowing skin and eyes like the night sky. After a few minutes, she set the cup down and looked at him. "You are alone?" Her voice was soft, with a lilting accent that made every word sound like a whisper of wind. "Yeah," he said simply. She studied him for a long moment, then lowered her gaze. I am alone too. Rain exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. What happened to you? She tightened the blanket around herself. I was taken by men who wished to sell me. I escaped, but they followed. I ran far. Then I had nowhere to go. Rain's jaw tightened. He had heard rumors of aliens being captured and traded like property. It made his blood boil. Well, you don't have to run anymore, he told her firmly. You can stay here as long as you need. She blinked at him, as if struggling to understand why he would offer such a thing. Finally, she spoke again. Your kindness is strange. Rain gave a small shrug. Guess I'm just built different. A flicker of something passed through her expression, something softer. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and whispered, Thank you. For the first time that night, she didn't look like she was waiting to run. Over the next few days, the woman, who told him her name was Azariah, began to settle into the small, quiet world Rain had built for himself. She was cautious at first, always watching him with those luminous eyes, as if expecting him to change, to turn cruel like the men who had taken her before. But he never did. He gave her space when she needed it, let her move at her own pace. He built a second cot near the fire, so she had a place to rest. He showed her how to use the water pump outside, and where to find the dried food in his small pantry. He even fashioned her a warm cloak from an old wool blanket, cutting and sewing it by hand to fit her slender frame. Azariah wasn't used to kindness. He could see it in the way she hesitated whenever he offered her something, the way she whispered soft thanks, as if afraid speaking too loudly would make it all disappear. But slowly she started to trust. One evening, as Rain sat outside sharpening his knife, Azariah approached, her footsteps almost silent on the stone path. She carried a small pile of wood in her arms, her silken hair glowing under the moonlight. I saw you gathering this before, she said softly, placing the wood beside him. You use it for the fire. Rain glanced at the neatly stacked logs, then up at her. That's right. Thanks. She gave a small nod, looking almost pleased. Then she settled beside him on the steps, her arms wrapped around her knees. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the rustling of trees, the distant hoot of an owl. Finally, Azariah spoke again. You built this place by yourself? Yeah, Rain said, running the sharpening stone along the blade's edge. Took a long time. But I wanted a place that was mine. Somewhere quiet. She was quiet for a moment. Then, in a barely audible voice, she whispered, It feels safe. Rain stopped sharpening and glanced at her. The way she stared at the stars, her expression so distant, told him she had never known a place that felt safe before. He set the knife down. You ever had a home before? Her lips pressed together. I had a place where I was born. But my people, we were always moving, always running. Even before our world fell. She closed her eyes briefly. I do not know what it is like to belong to one place. Rain leaned back, resting his arms on his knees. You could belong here if you want. Azariah turned her head, her eyes searching his face as if trying to see if he truly meant it. You would let me stay? As long as you want, he said simply. Something flickered across her face, something fragile, almost like hope. She lowered her gaze and murmured, Then? I will help you build. Rain raised an eyebrow. Build. She nodded, a faint hint of determination in her voice. You made this home alone. But now, you are not alone. A slow smile tugged at the corner of Rain's lips. He hadn't realized how much he had missed hearing someone else's voice at night, feeling the quiet presence of another person nearby. Maybe, just maybe, his lonely little home in the wilderness wasn't meant to be his alone anymore. The days turned to weeks, and Azariah kept her promise. She wasn't just helping, she was transforming his home in ways he never expected. She had a natural sense for building, guiding him on how to reinforce the stone walls with stronger placements, how to carve channels to redirect rainwater, how to shape the land itself to protect their small home from the elements. Rain had always been good with his hands, but Azariah brought something different. A knowledge passed down through her people, techniques that blended nature and structure in ways that made everything feel alive. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, they sat on the newly built stone ledge overlooking the valley. The cabin behind them now had an expanded roof, sturdier walls, and a small garden bed they had dug together. Azariah stretched her long legs out, watching the sky shift from orange to deep purple. "It is strange," she murmured. Rain leaned back on his elbows. "What is?" She turned her head toward him, her violet-blue eyes shimmering in the dim light. "For so long I believed survival meant running, moving, never stopping. But now," she glanced back at the home they had built. "Now I think I was wrong." Rain studied her profile, the soft curve of her jaw, the gentle rise and fall of her breath. "It's not wrong to want a place to call your own." She was silent for a moment, then turned fully to face him. "This is your home, Rain. But is it mine, too?" He held her gaze. "It's ours," he said simply. A slow, almost hesitant smile touched her lips. Then, to his surprise, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand before curling around it. Her skin was cool but sent warmth through him all the same. "Then I will stay," she whispered. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I want to be here. With you." Rain squeezed her hand gently, feeling something settle inside him, something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just a man living in a house he built. He was home,